And once again, I'm compelled because just the last commentary got me thinking about because they're trying to romanticize the hobo life. You know, it's just clothes on your back and you're free to life and you're not punching that clock. It drive me crazy, punching that time clock in and out every day. And my life is so much better than yours and stuff, and is what they're trying to say. That's is the message of that documentary. Is that a hobo's life is somehow better than mine. I hope you'll forgive me. It's cold front blew in about 90 minutes ago. There's 40 miles an hour, 40-mile-an-hour winds at my back coming out of the northwest. So this is a critique and I hope a little bit of an enlightenment about the movie. I don't care. I'm going to turn that on. I like being able to see my own eyes. I don't like being some. Sorry, I thought somebody was walking by. When you live on the streets, you have to be hyper vigilant. It's not paranoia, but this is about the romantic portrayal of the brief life and tragic death of Christopher McCandless Johnson, as captured by director, writer, producer, Sean Penn. Now, even before seeing the movie, actually, I'm still technically an owner of that DVD, wherever the hell it's at. I bought a copy of the DVD of the movie Into the Wild. This is a critique of Into the Wild. And it's especially a critique of how Sean Penn, just look at his movies like Isn't She Lovely? Sean Penn loves portraying insane people and loves in the movies he's directed and stuff like that, portraying all sorts of psychosis and shit. Didn't he do? He did Crossing Guard, Jack Nicholson, and look at his filmography. You'll see that he's obsessed with psychosis. He has appears to have doesn't like people that are relatively psychologically normal, and he likes really extreme. And Christopher Johnson McCandless was a rich kid who got great grades and stuff because when you do like African studies, all you have to do is show up and toe the cultural Marxist out of Africa line, and you're going to get A's and stuff like that. He was a little rich kid. He came from a fucked up family, and as many students, his schizophrenia may have come from the use of amphetamines. Using amphetamines and cramming and stuff like that. I don't see how to do much cramming. If when you're like in humanities, which appears to be what he was in, I haven't done enough research, but that's the one thing that they mentioned was, oh, he got an A in about starvation in Africa. It's pretty easy to do. It's anybody even studies Africa, studies in humanities. As long as you kiss ass, he's the kind of guy who could throw off a quote. Did appear to have a functional memory and stuff, but then again, not. He lives in one of the things that really got me. He lives in an area where the tidal changes and just the rivers are phenomenal. When you get towards, because he grew up pretty close to Maine and near the Fundy tidal bore, which, well, how long is that? Like 100 and something miles that comes in and out every day. It's more than 180 miles or something. The Penobscot, especially like the Conduskeg River, that's in a single day. The tide will go up and down, 19, 20 feet. He comes from an area where tidal action is very well known, and also the snow melt and runoff. And yet he makes this romantic journey, meeting all these interesting people, and goes to Slab City. By the way, you're gone, Slab City guy. I know somebody communicated with you on here. One of my subscribers communicated with you, but your attitude towards me was just negative. You know, I think before or about the time you could answer the guy's question, you were blocked. I think, well, actually, when I block you, you still end up you're subscribing to me, but you just can't see me. So that was the two real things I want to tackle here is that number one, Christopher McCandless Johnson, don't remember any mention of a girlfriend really anywhere in there. Let me see, you're 22 years old, you've been in college around all them hotties. Okay. So he does this wild deal and he forms this real tight male bond with the friendly, fascinating, always funny Vince Vaughn, who ends up going to prison and shit, who employs him and taught him so much. Oh, and that guy that Vince told him, you want to know about preserving meat, talk to this guy. And that guy didn't know shit about, it's one of, that's actually after he crossed the main thing is he goes all the way up to Alaska, and in springtime, before the mountain snow melt begins, he crosses a river like where you can see where he's standing. That's all a big, huge gravel and rock bed that shows you the true span of the river bottom during snow melt and runoff. And yet he's able to wade across it when there's been no rain and there's been no snow melt. Oh, and he even marks the spot or something like that, I think, with a piece of rag, bright rag or something. I know I'm probably going to go 12, 15 minutes on this because it's so fucking hilarious. He crosses it, doesn't make any immediate plans on how to get back across when snow melt happens. Goes across and he finds the abandoned Fairbanks bus deal that moose hunters use, and everything was there. It had a stove, it had a bed. He was like in heaven. He was finally into the wild, alone and free for those his gay demon inside of him, and his schizophrenia and they present him as an organized, intelligent, thinking person, but that doesn't mean that he was anywhere close to sane. The guy was fucking nuts. You don't cross a river like that in Alaska without developing some sort of tactic or strategy for getting back across it. I'm sorry, I'm now looking for my own lighter. When the snow belt begins, better string you up a rope bridge or something like that. He tried to make a raft, yada yada, I think, whatever. But he shoots a moose, and apparently the guy who knows all about preserving meat didn't tell him is when you bring down an animal that size, the first thing you do is, because he's surrounded by dead twigs and everything, the first thing you do is you make 4 piles for northeast, southwest. Doesn't matter, because winds can be what we call variable. They come out of one direction and suddenly start coming out of the opposite direction. So when you got a big animal like that, just to get it, skinned, gutted, and quartered up and stuff, the first thing you do is bear in mind, this guy's been all over. He's been, I think, down to Mexico already and talked to all these kind of people with Bushcraft. And nobody told him how to actually, he could have possibly survived the winter there. And did somebody tell him that the first thing you got to do is you got to start a fire and go ahead and just go around and you strip the pine needles, because they produce a white, dense smoke that will keep the insects off. I've never really heard anybody talk about this except me. And that's what you got to do. And so they also can't track it. And that flimsy ass, and you really don't have to go any further than right there. you need to continue building the fire. You better have had you a roll of twine, and then you can tie on to little bushes or trees nearby and start cutting off slabs of meat and laying them over the string, and then continue building fire on either sides of that string to keep the goddamn insects off, and it will dry naturally in the dry air of Alaska. What we call air-cured meat and shit. Somebody didn't give the boy, and he's supposed to know all about libraries. He's a college graduate. Gave $25,000 to Oxfam to feed the little African kids. Yeah, and then he's crazy when he abandons all of his cash money after he wakes up in a flood, after parking in an arroyo somewhere out in like Arizona or New Mexico or something. He wakes up and all of a sudden he realizes that there's a wall of water running his way. That's how fucking he's just nuts. I mean, there's a reason that ditch is there, and there's a reason why it's called Arroyo. He took off on an adventure ill-prepared and not really having any common sense whatsoever. Sure, it's the desert, but you really don't camp in a low spot, because especially that time of year when the monsoons might come through. You know, the water here in Texas don't come off the Gulf of Mexico. It comes off the Pacific. Almost all our water comes off the Pacific, although sometimes it has to cross Mexico to get here, or California to get here. Almost all our water in Texas comes from the Pacific, not the Gulf of Mexico. I hope you're making my point, is that, you know, early in life, I became an outdoorsman, developed a lot of bushcraft, hunted mountain lion, was taught how to hunt bear, although we never really did a bear kill. And shit, learned how to track. Man, I can track people. I can pick it. Even you can walk across a big parking lot, and if I've got enough of your track, you know, if you're wearing a unique shoe print, a lot of them now are just identical. So many that it used to be pretty easy, and then you just go around the edge of the. But this first screw up right there was not knowing how to treat the moose, which is immediately you leave the moose sitting right there. There's, you know, other than you want them to start bleeding out, you might cut its throat while the heart's still beating or whatever. You might cut don't really need to cut the gut up, but the first thing you do is you start with 4 fires around you and lots of pine needles. You really need to have about 100, 200 pounds of pine needles. You need a pair of gloves to really do that well. You can do it barehanded though. Then pine needles, the pine oil in them gives off a dense white smoke that deters all mosquitoes, biting flies, blood-sucking flies, and in his bizarre attempt to like move the meat to another place to smoke it was a sign of lack of any kind of. He was no genius. He was a schizophrenic that was suicidal. He really proved he was suicidal when he crossed a river that even where he grew up, he knows about tidal, and he knows about snow melt and stuff, how a tiny creek can become a raging torrent that you're not going to get across without a line or a bridge. And then he begins, and even though he had a book on local native edible plants, and I'm sorry, it's only there's so many other things you can fill your belly with, and almost all roots have some toxicity just because they're growing in the ground. You're trying to eat those little tiny wild potato tuber, what he thought was wild potato kind of tubers or knots on, and it would turn out to be a highly lethal plant. Please, if you're hungry, you can just fill your belly with grass, not weeds, grass. Of course, in that area, there's not a hell of a lot of grass. But you can find the leaves of bushes and stuff you can do. One of the preliminary tests is to chew up the leaf a bit, looking for any kind of bitterness and stuff, and hold it under your tongue for about 15 minutes and then spit it out. Then if the next day you haven't not showing any symptoms of illness, then you might be able to eat more. But what he did was just reckless, and to tell you the truth, it appears to be that he poisoned himself deliberately. He crossed a creek that he knew should have known, educated person, well traveled by then, should have known that it was, he had that experience with the mighty, Colorado River, and so on. He should have known by then. It's tiny trickles turn into raging torrents. He already had the experience in the arroyo. You see where I'm going with this? And the fact that he abandoned his money, as in dirty money, I guess, because it came from his dirty, sadomasochistic, abusive parents. And shit, to tell you the truth, I think the guy was gay and schizophrenic. And seriously, study the filmography of Sean Penn and tell me that he's not just obsessed with major league nut jobs, and that movies like Into the Wild or these hobo documentaries are just documenting or romanticizing the lives of people who are either criminals or criminally fucking insane, just loser psychos. Go ahead, tell me I'm wrong.